Hello, and welcome to this new series that I call the Philosopher Tier List. I take a philosopher, look at their philosophy, and subjectively give my opinions on it, while also giving you all the objective tools that you need to make the decision yourself on whether you agree with them or not. So for the first episode, we have a very important philosopher, like God tier philosopher, legend. Um, I think you probably know him. His name was Socrates. So yeah, let's get right into it. So firstly, I'll just give you a little bit of an introduction to who he was. So Socrates was a Greek philosopher. Obviously, he was from Athens, and yeah, he's credited as the founder of Western philosophy, and he mainly dealt with the ethical tradition of thought. He is very famous for having been executed for potentially corrupting the youth, and he famously defended himself at his own trial. Um, and yeah, whatever we know about him is not through him. He was famous to like not write down anything that he said for some reason. Like he had his reasons, and um, yeah, but whatever we know about him is through whatever his disciples wrote, particularly Plato and Xenophon. Um, so that's just a little bit about him. And now I'm going to move a little bit more into how he continues to be prominent today. So, yeah, I mean, ever since he passed and his works went on to Plato and then Aristotle. Aristotle taught Alexander the Great, and Alexander conquered a lot of the world. So Socratic thought just spread everywhere, and so much so that even Islamic scholars continued to study him, and influences of his work can be seen in Stoicism, cynicism, in the works of Kierkegaard, and also yeah, um, and also the humanist movement. Like yeah, he's probably one of the most famous philosophers, and pop culture, and everybody knows who Socrates was. Um, so yeah, let's continue to talk about the facets of his philosophy. So like one of the first things he preached to the public was the Socratic method of questioning, which is which first of all involved the base assumption of being ignorant, that you don't know what the other person is thinking or what their beliefs are, and you constantly question them like relentlessly until you are satisfied by the answer that they give you. And and yeah, so he would just keep asking questions to the philosophers of his time, and I would not stop until he was satisfied, and until he completely knew where they were coming from. So Socrates also believed that knowledge is the key to living a good life, and he encouraged people to seek knowledge and wisdom through self-examination and dialogue. So he said that knowledge was far more important than wealth, power. He didn't want any of those, even though he had a huge following at that time. And he argued that happiness just comes from living a virtuous life. So he also used Socratic irony as a method of dialogue. So yeah, Socratic irony, and I'm going to read this definition. So it is a dissimulation of ignorance practiced by Socrates as a means of confuting an adversary. So what this means is that he would assume to know nothing about the person he was debating with, and he was also ignorant about the topic and discussion, and would draw draw out, he would, I would say, he would filter out all the noise or all the unnecessary information that an adversary presents in the debate, and only pick out what he does not know, to continue pressing on it until he got the solution, I would say. um so he's also, Socrates was also known to to also preach the examined life, which I mentioned earlier. So he wanted people to continuously introspect and ask themselves, examine themselves whether they're living up their lives to their own potential or whatever they viewed as virtuous or not. Um, and yeah, and so that's what he wanted his people to, or like his followers to continue preaching. And there's also some wrongly attributed dialogue to him, which is that I know nothing. And that was actually derived from Plato, but it is like, it is agreed that through like Socratic irony and Socratic dialogue that he kind of believed in it, but did not like verbatim say this. So yeah, and also Socrates' view on piety is radically different from the conventional conception at that time in Athens. In keeping with his conception of virtue as a form of knowledge, he uses that to determine if someone is pious, like the same Socratic method of questioning. So if you practice, like he argued that if you practice all the conventional practices, like, can you say what piety is? And if you cannot, then like, then can you um, assume to be ignorant and continue to search for what piety is? And if you're a good person, then can you say what virtue consists of? And if you're not a good person, or you cannot like, or if you cannot clarify what virtue is, then, and you do not spend your life trying to find that virtue and the definition of piety, then whatever you preach as goodness in your conventional practices is a sham. Yeah. So yeah, and another important facet of Socratic philosophy is that he did not leave any written text behind. Okay. And a lot of his work can only be found through his students, Plato and Xenophon. But what's important to note is the Socratic problem that is presented through these two accounts. Because while while Plato depicts him as a guardian angel of sorts, Xenophon kind of depicts him as a cynic. Uh, like, yeah, the only consensus is that he didn't look too good, I think. Uh, but besides that, like, these are vastly different sort of depictions, like a cynic versus a guardian angel. And sometimes this also results in a different sort of message that both of them portray. So we do not know how much of these accounts are just Socrates' philosophy and how much of it is what I like to call masala added by the people who are writing about him. So now let's move on a little into the positives of what we like, of whatever these accounts say. So I genuinely believe the Socratic method of questioning, and a lot of people also believe that it's a powerful tool for critical thinking and exploring ideas. So it encourages people to question their beliefs and assumptions and to think deeply about the implications of their views. So Socratic method also results in empathy because you're trying to figure out what a person is thinking, and you like in the end you get a healthy, fruitful debate, and it tends to reduce ad hominem attacks, which can sometimes be a problem when you're debating with someone. And then the second advantage is that Socrates is like I would say like the importance he places on knowledge is again very good, and he encouraged people to seek out knowledge through self-examination and dialogue. So it has had a lasting impact on Western thought in general, and even the things that you fill out in like a science laboratory experiment, like the method you used, why you used it, etc., all can be traced back to Socrates. So Socrates' concept of the examined life encourages people to think critically about their beliefs and actions and to question whether they're living a virtuous and just life. So this emphasis on introspection can lead to like greater personal development, growth, and you become a better person if you constantly think about how like you can be a better person. So also, and then this also ties in with the emphasis he places on virtue, because he believed that living a virtuous life was essential to living a good and meaningful life, and he told people to not think about wealth, power, and just like do good. And it gives a framework for people to come back to, and use in their life, regardless of who they are, what religion they follow, etc. So again, this when he couples with the idea of piety being virtue and not religion, it like takes pressure off religion to do that. And also Socrates' ideas and teachings have had like such a huge influence on Western philosophy and continue to be studied and debated by philosophers even today. Let's move on to the criticisms because there are a few. So Socrates, in his famous defense on corrupting the youth, does admit that to some degree he has set one generation against the other. And in making this confession, he makes it apparent why some members of the jury uh, were convinced that he has corrupted the city's young. So and that kind of led to his demise. And now and the Socratic method, while it is useful in figuring out a person's views, it some people have also criticized it for being very overly aggressive or confrontational because you're constantly asking someone questions again and again without revealing information about your own beliefs or your own views. And it can also lead to some sort of power disbalance in a debate. And yeah, so while the method is actually designed to challenge beliefs, it can also be seen as attacking or undermining the beliefs of others. And okay, yeah. So while Socrates also places importance on virtue, he ignores the complexity and diversity of human experience, which can lead to different views of morality and different views of virtue. Now, is stealing from the rich and giving back to the poor virtuous? Or are you just, or is the act of stealing not virtue in itself? That is something that he does not touch upon. And yeah, so so it so the Socratic emphasis on virtue kind of ignores this. And one major criticism of Socrates is the lack of written works. So we do not know how accurate his teachings were, and they may have been filtered through the perspective of his students. Contradictory accounts of Socrates make a reconstruction of his philosophy nearly impossible. And again, this ties back into the Socratic problem that I highlighted earlier. But but still, Socrates has had a huge influence, with the exception of the Epicureans and uh, yeah, and a few other philosophers. Almost all philosophical currents after Socrates trace their roots back to him. So Plato's Academy, Aristotle's school, the Cynics, the Stoics. So Socrates' most famous disciple was, of course, Plato. But his oldest disciple was a man named Antisthenes, who became the first of the Cynics and the teacher of Diogenes, who we will look at later because he's very interesting. And Diogenes in turn inspired somewhat like I think Crates and then Zeno, and Zeno was the one who founded Stoicism. So Socrates also inspired medieval philosophers and modern ones. All tend to look at him, his life, and everything. And I guess his main influence in his time was to democratize philosophy, making it very, very accessible to the common masses. Everyone could be a philosopher. And that is what made Socrates viewed as dangerous in his times. And it would be a very, very massive understatement to say that philosophy would not exist in its current scope if it were not for Socrates. And now I would like to move to the most important topic, or like the part that where I give my opinions, which is my agreeableness to Socratic line of thinking. So I give the Socratic examination a 5, a 5 out of 5. I believe that self-reflection is very important in life. It it continues to be used widely, even in therapy and mental health. Um, People ask themselves, um, like they reflect on the things that have happened to them. They ask themselves what went wrong, how they can do better, etc. Huge, huge way to improve your life. And I agree with everything you said about it. So 5 out of 5. Socratic irony is something I would give a 4.5 out of 5. It's a very good way to make someone doubt themselves. Not gonna lie, right? But um, but Socratic irony, and by extension, the Socratic method, is like, yeah, it is the best way to get to the heart of a problem. But I do recognize the fact that if the other person is not receptive to it, and also you're not giving out equal information, it can be viewed as like a disbalance, which is why 4.5. For the line, I know that I know nothing, even though it's wrongly attributed to Socrates, I would like his take on knowledge that you do not know anything is a solid 5 out of 5 for me. It is important even in the learning curve. It's a thing that once you start something thinking that you know everything, but then there's a huge dip in knowledge, like a huge dip in what you feel you know, because that's just how it works. Like you open your mind up to a huge, huge like array of things, uh, like in the field that you're studying, and you feel like you know nothing. But from there, you move up, 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 because it's kind of it brings about that humility that is necessary to become a person that is receptive to learning an alternative perspective and opening your mind up to new things. And like once you reach the low point, you actually move higher than what you think you knew, obviously, because that arrogance goes away. And the arrogance of like feeling like you know everything is a huge mistake, in my opinion. So yeah, and the idea of Socratic piety, the one where piety is virtue, and that's about it, and it shouldn't be tied to any religion, is 4.5 out of 5 for me. Religious ceremonies do not make a good person, and a good person may not perform ceremonies. They're not interlinked. Socrates' dialogue, on or like his thought, or like his questioning to reach this conclusion was brilliant, in my opinion. It took me days to understand, but I get it, and I agree. It's an important highlight of this. So if you add this up, you kind of get a 19 out of 20, but I'm going to deduct 1 point. And that is because we do not know how much of his views have been skewed or filtered by his students. So yeah, Socrates gets an 18 out of 20, which is a 90%, I believe. Yeah, 90%. Makes him a solid A tier and a strong start to this series. So, and that's just me saying it, strong start to the series. But yeah, I'm hoping to continue this series, look at different perspectives, and try to like place them on a tier list. And I love Socrates. I think he influenced a lot of people and lived a very, very fruitful life considering his impact. Yeah, I really like Socrates. But I'm hoping to see more. I'm hoping to see more of his influence once I start studying his contemporaries. And yeah, so continue to like and subscribe. Follow this show if you haven't. Subscribe to the channel if you're watching it on YouTube, and press the follow on Spotify if you're on there. And I'm trying to release an episode every week. So let's see how that goes. Um, yeah. So we'll, I guess, see you next week. And yeah, feel free to reach out via email, DM, or whatever if you have any questions, or if you disagree, and we can have a good conversation about philosophy, because that is what we're here to do. We're here to learn something more than what we knew yesterday, and that can only happen to through Socratic dialogue. Socratic dialogue. So yeah, let's talk, and yeah, see you next.